everybody. Welcome back to the Primas Podcast. I am Cindy, and that's my prima Jess.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in again.
And we have a super special guest today. We have Vicky.
Happy to be here with you guys.
So Vicky, you guys, it's really cool. So Vicky is an occupational therapist who has 20 years experience working with children with developmental disabilities. And so she's joining us today. We're very thankful because we have someone that we're going to share this conversation with, and we think it's very important that we bring up. So we feel very blessed that you're able to do that with us. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So another quick fun fact about Vicky. So we didn't know this, but we're all from the same neighborhood. Shout out North East L.A. And Vicky, can you share very quickly, because I haven't asked you this and I know it just happened. And like I told you before we started, I remember the first message we got from you. How did you find us? How did we make this beautiful connection?
It was a few months back, where I stumbled across your Instagram, and then I noticed that we had a couple of friends in common because we are from Northeast LA, Highland Park, Eagle Rock area for me. I think,
yeah, Highland Park and Cypress Park. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, and then I believe I started browsing on your Instagram, and I liked a lot of the content that you guys were putting out. I feel like it was some taboo topics that some people are afraid to touch. And you were also talking a lot about intergenerational trauma and breaking cycles. And I just reached out and wanted to give you guys your kudos for doing what you're doing, because I think it's really cool that you guys are doing that.
Awesome. Yay! Yeah. We have that on recording for live. So thank you, Vicky. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. No, for real. Like I try to make it a point to reach out and give people kudos and credit when it's due, and you guys definitely deserve it.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting that. So yeah, thank you so much. So, I can't believe we're from the same neighborhood, and I can't believe we connected this way. That's so cool. Sometimes we got to give a shout out to the algorithm, right, Jess? Yeah. We talk a lot about Big Brother, but I feel like this is one of those times where it worked in our favor.
That is true. That's I had not thought about that, but yeah, that's exactly true.
Right? It's like, so today's topic, it hits home for us as women, as mothers. And I just wanted to start before we dive into it, is say why did we think it was important for us to bring this up? Does anybody want to start? I usually volunteer myself to start, and I feel like that's rude.
Did you let them know what we're going to be talking about?
We're going to talk about.
So what inspired this topic for us, or for me personally, and why I was excited to was because like Vicky had said, we usually talk about topics that are very taboo, and Cindy, you also mentioned this is going to be my last season, and I'm glad we're diving into things that are making us even more uncomfortable, making us step outside of our comfort zone, out of the Primas Podcast. And talking about this topic is definitely falling under that category for us. It's going to be very serious. We want to make it informational and provide a lot of solutions. So yeah.
And today we're talking about identifying red flags of childhood sexual abuse. And so that'll be on the title, and that'll be on the Instagram marketing, Vicky. So I should have told you that, because you're like, can we introduce the topic first?
So okay. Yeah, there's going to be editing and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're talking about, signs of childhood sexual abuse.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Child abuse. It is important to note that there are different types of child abuse. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, which includes neglect and abandonment. But one that I feel people kind of are afraid to talk about is childhood sexual abuse. So the reason why I want to talk about this is because the statistics are astonishing. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 girls, okay, I feel like I have to slow down when I say that. 1 in 4 girls, yes, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually molested. They will experience sexual abuse before the age of 18.
Yeah.
And, you know, after the age of 18, it's 1 in 5 men and 1 in 2 women. 50% of our female population will experience sexual abuse in adulthood. I feel like we could talk about this topic forever because it really does affect people across the lifespan. But specifically, we're going to be talking about the 1 in 5 and, the 1 in 4 and the 1 in 6.
Got it.
That's very specific to children.
Correct. Yeah. And like along with that statistic, I remember in college, one of my psych professors had 2 boys, and she made this comment that forever stood with me, which was that 90% of like sexual abuse victims are molested or raped or like sexually abused by a family member or a close friend family member. 90%. And she's like, that's the number that's reported. There's so many unreported cases, and that forever stood out to me because I'm just like, whoa, 90%. You know what I mean? That's like an A, right? The equivalence of that. And that's a huge number of reported cases. So it just, yeah, it made me think of that when we started talking about this topic, and like what really intrigued me in wanting to talk about it. Let's talk about that 90%.
Yeah, actually, thank you for bringing that up. And you are so right. It made me think about something else. It is a little over 90%. And you're right. We always, I'm not a mom, but I have lots of nieces, lots of nephews. I've worked with kids. I care about kids. And the reason why such a low percentage of cases are reported is because children often don't have the language and the vocabulary to describe and express what happened to them or what's happening to them. It's usually not until late adulthood, after experiencing everything that comes with it, that maybe you go to therapy and maybe you learn the language to be able to describe what it was that happened. But yeah, the reason for you had said that just a small percentage gets reported. I believe it's about 10%. The majority of the cases don't get reported because of the fact that they don't know how to describe what it was that happened to them.
That's a great point. Yeah. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this was because I think I saw it a lot in my culture growing up, and just how, you know, we kind of like swept things under the rug. Like if there was an uncle or a neighbor or something, like we just wouldn't touch that subject, or I'd be told like, Cindy, shut up, like don't be quiet, don't, you know, talk about that stuff. And as a child, I same thing, Vicky, like I didn't really know. It just made me feel so uncomfortable, but like knowing that no one else around me, they didn't want to talk about it. When I was older, I'm like, no, now I'm gonna effing talk about it. You know, like this is important. We can be avoiding so many tragedies, and like you mentioned, so many situations where it's a developmental thing that people will carry for the rest of their lives. And it's like, because we don't want to talk about it, like we're gonna talk about it at least. And I think that's a part of the solution. So that's my why. And quick trigger warning, if we haven't said it already, you know, this is a very sensitive topic. And so trigger warning, we're going to talk about the red flags. We're going to give as much information as we can in this short amount of time. And so, yeah, let's get started. So should we start with myths, Vicky?
Sure. Yeah. Just before jumping into some of the myths and facts of childhood sexual abuse, I'm just going to go ahead and read out the textbook definition of what it is. Okay, so child sexual abuse, also called child molestation, is a form of child abuse in which an adult or older adolescent uses a child for sexual stimulation. Forms of child abuse include engaging in sexual activities with a child, indecent exposure, child grooming, and child sexual exploitation, including using a child to produce child pornography. That's the textbook definition from Wikipedia.
Thank you.
Good one.
Okay, and then before we touch on the red flags, there are some myths that I would like to help dispel, because even in the professional community, I still hear people, that don't have all the information. I still hear people making comments with bias and prejudice behind them. I have heard people make comments that childhood sexual abuse only happens in Latino households, right? Or the majority of them happen in Latino households. That is not true. That is a myth. The myth is that child sexual abuse only happens in lower economic classes of society. So low-income communities, communities where you have multiple families living in one home. That is a risk factor. However, it's not true that it only happens to a certain population of people. It happens all over the world, unfortunately. Child abuse does not discriminate, and it can happen to anyone, anywhere, and it exists in every corner of society. And it happens to people of different races, different socioeconomic classes, and all different types of communities. So there it is. That's the myth, that it only happens with certain people, and that is just not true. It happens more often, and probably when where you least expect it.
That's crazy.
That's true. Paris Hilton just came out, remember? And like, we think money and like she's white, it'll never happen to them. And look, she just came out with like her going to like the most prestigious board, what is it, not board and care, that's my work term.
It's like a camp or something, right? Like a camp,
like where you send your kids to school.
Boarding school.
Boarding school. She went to like a very prestigious boarding school. I think the tuition was like $80,000 a year, and it happened to her there. So yeah, you're right, Vicky. It doesn't discriminate, and yeah, we're specifically talking about across the board, right? Child sexual abuse.
Yeah, and it doesn't just happen in the home. It happens at school too, unfortunately. So
yeah, schools, camps, any church. Yeah, that's crazy. So the other myth we want to talk about is perpetrators of child sexual abuse are mentally ill. So that's a myth. Should I read it off, or do you want to just explain, Vicky? Because I feel like you probably have this off the top of your head.
Well, that is a myth. The perpetrators of child sexual abuse are mentally ill. I feel like it doesn't do justice to people who are in fact mentally ill. There is no one size fits all on what an abuser looks like. I have friends who have been abused by not just family members, but people within the school systems or one of their friends' parents, or even at church. It happens at church. So no, a person is not necessarily mentally ill. While some abusers do have mental health issues that contribute to them doing what they do to a child, many do not. It's a stereotype, and that stereotype can be harmful to a lot of people. It can be harmful to people who do have mental illness, because it may cause other people to look at them differently and discriminate against them and mistrust them. So yeah, don't be fooled. Not all predators have a mental illness. Some do, but A lot don't. A lot of people are also just very opportunistic. Like whereas they maybe didn't think about it before, but now they have access to a kid and the opportunity was there and they got curious, right? That's how it happens as well.
Yeah, this is very triggering, right? This whole conversation. So the third myth is, and we just talked about this a little earlier, a parent's main worry should not be to protect their child from strangers. Because as we mentioned, is it 93% now of child abuse happens at the hands of someone the child knows? And these are the reported cases.
Exactly. Going back to the first fact that Jess had mentioned, we always try to teach our kids about stranger danger and kind of like instill that fear in kids that, te van a robar. So someone's going to take you. But the fact is that a very small percentage of children are abused by a stranger. It happens with people who are very close to them. So that left me with a lot to think about when I learned about that statistic.
Yeah.
Same. And when I made that statistic, what stood out was that my professor had said, because she had 2 boys, she was like, I never let them spend the night anywhere. They were always at home. And it wasn't until they got older where I explained to them and they were able to like not only mentally understand, but physically. Now they were like young men, and she's like, okay, well, now you're old enough to like defend yourself. And I give you enough tools throughout your life. So I didn't put you in a situation like that as a kid. Sorry, guys, I live in the hood. You hear the helicopter? Okay,
Circling
sorry.
around your house.
I know. So that also stood out because that she knew that, you know what I mean? She put 2 and 2 together and she's like, no, this statistic is there for a reason. I'm not just going to let my children go home. To spend the night at a friend's house, like, who are these parents? Have you met these parents? Who are these people? And like, go based off of that. And we're not accusing anyone, we're not saying don't ever let your kids go anywhere, but we are saying like be more conscious and aware of like these choices, because are we teaching our kids like the language? Are we giving them the examples of like what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, and they're never too young. Like my kid's 4 years old. And I remember growing up, I'd always hear like, oh, well, they're kids. They don't know any better. And that's so not true. My 4-year-old is so aware and so well informed of like what she can and can't get away with, and they're these little human beings that it's our job to like not only protect them, but give them those tools at a very young age. It's never too early to give them this language. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yes.
Yes.
They are aware. I like that part, that part where, yeah, we were told that a lot as kids. Like, what do they know? Or my mom will tell me now, like, oh, I didn't realize how observant kids were until I seen you with your daughter or whatever. And I'm like, no, they're very smart, very capable. And I think we're starting to see that more, but that's also something, right? Like that's a myth. I think, you still hear people are like, they don't understand. And it's just like, but they're still going to try to make sense of it. And if you're being inappropriate or something wrong is going on, they're not going to be able to have that clarity. And so that's where they're a little vulnerable. So.
Exactly. Yeah. No, you both definitely hit the nail on the head with that one. I was going to say that the best thing that adults can do to keep children safe is to be informed. And that's what we are here to do today. And it sounds like both of you guys are very informed. And that is the best thing that you can do to keep children safe and share that information with other parents as well. That is just one thing that people can do to keep children safe after we discuss some of the red flags. I like that we're going to also talk about some of the solutions. As you said, you guys are very solution based and we have some solutions to offer as well.
Yeah, we do. I'm excited about that too. So let's get started with some of the red flags. I'm going to just read it off, the first one. reports sexual abuse by a parent, a caregiver, or another adult. Vicky, did you have more insight on that?
Yeah, so if a child reports sexual abuse and says that it happened, believe them, because less than 5% of cases that are reported are false. Less than 5% of the cases that are reported are false. And the reporting didn't even come from the kid. It came from a parent who was trying to retaliate against the other parent. So a common thing that I hear among a lot of women that I know is that they did report it and no one did anything about it, or they did report it and no one believed them. And that's a red flag. That's if a kid comes to you and they report that they have been sexually abused, listen to them, because statistically they're telling the truth.
Yeah. And it's in our culture, to be very dismissive, and not give our kids a voice, when we're telling them when they're telling us to stop, or I don't like that. Prima, we've talked about it, and I don't know the right term, but like, it's that, not bullying, but like kind of picking on them, and like not respecting their boundaries at a very young age. And it's just like, why do we continue to do that? It is a cultural norm, it's like, we just have this mentality that like kids just don't know any better. And like, that's what was done to them, and so forth and so forth. And they're just doing what they were taught, But
yes,
yeah, listening to our kids is a very important one, Like, I recently posted that video of like that mom who was like wetting her kid. And I know it's not like about sexual abuse, but even that minuscule, like she was wetting him with a water gun for fun, for likes, because she's a YouTube influencer, and I don't understand it. But it goes back to that. You're telling your 10-year-old son that mom doesn't even care about your voice. He said no 5 times, like, mom, stop, mom, stop. So it's just like, how do we expect to listen to our kids when we're still acting like that? When we're still showing this on now all media platforms, that like our kids essentially don't have a voice. And that's like what's heartbreaking to most people who like saw that video, And it's like, because we're trying to be a different generation where we're trying to do better, right? Where we're not just going to say, well, that's how it's always done, and shrug our shoulders and move on with our ways. So yeah, it's really hard.
People tend to normalize the behavior. And that's actually what keeps the cycle going, right? And that is why we are having these conversations, because we are cycle breakers in our own right. And we want to be better informed so that it doesn't continue down the line. Yeah, no, Jess, that's a good point. Giving children autonomy. Autonomy is, as an adult, we don't like it when people are touching us without our permission, or they come too close to our personal bubbles. So why do we do that to kids as well? That also reminded me of a conversation that I had with friends, and I know that friends have this conversation often about, when I was a kid, it was like vagina was your pee-pee or whatever, like whatever nicknames that you give them. But there are parents that are now teaching their children the proper terms of what private parts are. And it's important.
Yeah, it is like that, giving them that language, like we've said, is enabling them, but giving it to them helps them, identify. And it's so not taboo, like, when my daughter, I started potty training her. Yeah, I use those terms too. I said like, and then I would also like start having those conversations and ask my other like mom friends, like, well, how did you phrase it? And I got a lot of ideas from, like even my own mom. And I would always tell my daughter, like, this is your vagina, and like nobody touches it, not even mommy, not daddy. Like, this is yours, and you need to learn how to like clean yourself for this and that reason, like not only cleanliness, but to also give her that, like, no one should be touching your body. This is your body and not mine. And I've seen within also like cultural norms is like parents will be like, well, that's my kid, or that belongs to me. And it's like, what are we showing our kids? We're like, not even their own body is like theirs to understand. And we give them the terminology to understand what's going on with their body and like why they do the things they do. Sorry guys, now it's the dog.
Hey, he wants to be part of the conversation too.
Those are good points, ladies. I feel that I'm very proud to be able to have these conversations, because we have to be intentional about breaking the cycles, and we're doing it, and it's uncomfortable, right? To check our parents, to check our siblings or whoever is around them, because it's never been done before. And it's, you have to be brave, but you're there to protect your child, even if it's not your own child. We have to protect kids, because like you said, Jess, there's not a lot of respect, like it all starts from respect. And when there isn't that for generations, it's hard. And then you're the bad guy. And it's like, it comes with all this and that. And it's just like, do it. It's worth it. Because then look at us as adults, how we manifest our different traumas, and, all of the mental health and all of the resources that we use up because we disrespected each other, essentially, right? Like we just continue to do it for generations. So great points. Next red flag: demonstrates bizarre, sophisticated, or unusual sexual knowledge. You want to give us more on that, Vicky?
Yeah, sure. So, if a child is using sexual terms, they're overly sexual, you got to ask, where is that coming from, right? Children who have been sexually abused, they may show over sexualized behavior, or they use very explicit sexual language. So that's a red flag. If your child, or a child that you care about, is playing with a group of friends and reports that a friend in their circle made them feel uncomfortable because they were talking about things that were inappropriate, things that are just not age appropriate at all. That's a red flag. It is.
Mm-hmm. And I want to add to that, because it reminds me of some of the stuff I've been reading on this, where a lot of it can also have to do with someone either like being explicit in front of a child is also child abuse, like masturbating in front of them, or having them touch themselves in front of you, or showing them pictures or recording them. And this red flag just reminds me of how, like, it doesn't necessarily look the way you think, and it's still something we need to be observant about, right? Like we need to pay close attention, because it's sneaky. It's not, the people who are doing this are definitely covering their tracks in whatever way, shape, or form. And so we have to be observant. I think we know we have to lean into that. We know when something isn't right.
Yeah.
Right? Like those sudden behavior changes where you're like, whoa, where did you learn that? Or at what age, because they're friends, like when my daughter started to go to kindergarten, different. Like she's a little bit older. She's starting to do a little crush thing, right? Where her other friends are. And so, just that introduction of, okay, that's fine, but let's talk about it. What does that mean? And we still have to be very respectful to others. And so I guess like evaluating at different stages, right? Like it's also, that's also different. Like, what do we talk about, and what are they going to actually comprehend from that?
Yeah, I think Jess, you had said that your daughter's 4 and that you already talked to her about this. It's never too early. You continue to talk to them, and you just change the way you express yourself, the way you explain it, and the vocabulary. You explain it to them in terms that a 4-year-old will understand, and that'll be different from a 14-year-old. But yes, it's always a great idea to just it's not a one and done thing, right? You don't just have the conversation one time and that's that. You continuously have the conversation, especially once your kid, goes to school, they start playing sports, they're staying after school. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I don't know if this is it's just kind of funny, but my daughter, like we do have these conversations, and she's kind of loud and sort of has like a microphone in her voice like all the time. So I'm always like, "Can you use your indoor voices?"
Mhm.
But I remember like recently, we have these random conversations and she'll just ask me questions. And we were at the grocery store and she was inside the basket and she's like, "Mom, when I'm an adult, is it okay for then me to touch my vagina?" And I'm just like, oh my gosh, dude. And then I was just like looking around. I
Who
saw
heard
my
that?
ears get so red. And I was just like, okay, baby, yes, when you're an adult, yes, we'll talk about it when you're a little bit more appropriate, like at an appropriate age. But it's just funny because yeah, she's 4 years old and like thinking about these thoughts. So it just goes back to say like we need to like continuously have these conversations, until they grasp it, because it's like they're absorbing so much right now, and now we're adding this topic in conversation, which is so complex, like even I have to be mindful and like as embarrassed as I felt at that moment, but I was also laughing. I was like, no, this is a serious conversation. I was like, like, and I remember like calling Cindy. I was like, dude, my daughter. And I'm just like, what do I do with her? And, like just troubleshooting with Cindy, and Cindy was like, this is what you tell her. Okay.
What was it? What did you guys tell her?
I know. No, just that. We were just
I
being
think,
funny, but
yeah, and I
our
think we
kids say
just,
the darnest things.
Yeah, they
and we
do.
just always share like, what do you, like it's very important. And at that time when when my daughter was younger, I was actually teaching human sexuality at a high school. So I was really like, you get super refreshed on all the terminology. And I was telling the high school students, like, say these words, be comfortable with saying these words, because we were learning about it from like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like it's the reproductive system of a female, of a male, because of evolution or whatever. It's to continue the species. And that's some of the stuff I was telling my daughter at like 2, 3, like, oh, that's your vagina. And it's a beautiful thing, because that's where babies come from. And, women's breasts, that's how we feed our children. I think it's a very beautiful thing when you also have that twist to it, because it's not a twist. That's human sexuality. But we've made it so perverted, so weird, that we're like, oh my God, I can't believe she said vagina. And we even get freaked out at the grocery store because it's just like, it's okay, because that's what it's called, right? Like, it's just, we're so conditioned to be like, no, don't go there. And that's what's caused a lot of issues as well in human sexuality. Just when we're healthy about it, we don't know so much. So we just do that to each other. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to throw this out there that kids do masturbate, and it's because they're exploring their bodies, right? And they may accidentally like touch themselves, and sometimes it feels good, right? And then they get curious, and then they begin to ask questions, and always just having that direct line of communication with your child. You want to be the adult that your child comes to when they have questions. And again, I don't have kids, but I have worked with kids, and I worked at a pediatric doctor's office where some parents came in with the concern that their child was masturbating. The child was not aware that that's what adults think is happening. They're just exploring their bodies and have certain sensations. The best thing that a parent could do in that situation, from what I've learned, is to not shame them, because it is something that, how do I say this? We may be afraid of thinking that that is something that kids do, but it's actually kind of a normal part of development, exploring your own body. The best thing that a parent can do is just to explain to them that this, there's a time and a place for this. And we definitely don't do this in front of anybody. Yeah, just throwing that out there, because you had mentioned adulthood. I just don't want parents to like freak out and think that there's something like weird with their kid.
That's
But
so true. I was that parent because when my daughter, I started potty training her is when it came about, because there was an emphasis on her vagina area. And then I even confided in my pediatrician, and she even like normalized it. She's like, no, Jess. And she just said exactly what you said, Vicky. And it made me feel better, because then I was so concerned. I don't know if I even told you, Prima, but I was just like, whoa, my daughter, like, how did she learn this? But the way the doctor had explained it to me was like, yeah, it's completely normal. You just started potty training her. And now it's like an emphasis on this new body part that's really fun. And I was just like, oh my gosh, you're so right. And then she even like brought it back to little girls when they're younger, they like sit on their feet and like rock on it. And she's like, that's when little girls are like learning their parts, or I don't know. And I was just like, I remember as a kid sitting and rocking on my feet, and it wasn't like, whoa, Jess, what are you doing? And like getting smacked for it. But it was just like, let them explore their bodies. Yeah.
Yeah. It happens.
It's normal.
Yeah. Especially when they're toddlers. Again, always important to have that open line of communication, because we just identified a red flag where, if a child knows more than what's appropriate for their age, but then you have, what your pediatrician just explained. This can get confusing, right? So going back to just being an informed adult and identifying like what's normal versus what's not normal, what's very inappropriate. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there in case like other parents were experiencing that. Like there's another point of view. Just threw it out there. Yeah.
No, and that's a great point. There's a lot of resources on this, right? Like always do a lot of research to be informed, because this is just like a whole life conversation that, like you said, we have with our children, and there's a lot we need to learn as well, right? Like for us to get comfortable and no. Okay. Next one. Another red flag is reports nightmares and/or experiences behavioral regression.
Yeah.
You want to give us more on that, Vicky?
Sure. So if a child is already potty trained and they're not wetting their bed anymore, and then all of a sudden they begin wetting their bed, that is a regression. They go back to behaviors that they had already moved on from, right? So that can be like bedwetting, that can be thumb sucking, or that can be like suddenly becoming anxious or fearful of adults around them. So those are the type of behaviors that are considered regression behaviors. That's a red flag and a sign that something may be happening. Again, not all the time, but usually if a 7, 8, 9-year-old, they've been potty trained and they have not been wetting the bed for years, but it starts again suddenly, it might be a good idea to just kind of ask questions, be curious. And if you don't know how to have those conversations, there are a lot of resources, and you can always definitely talk to your pediatrician.
Yes, that's a good one. The next one is child has difficulty walking or sitting.
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of like straightforward, right? That's if
it's like a physical sign.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
again, sorry, I was just going to say that there's a lot of red flags that we're not going to be able to go over today. We have some that we're going over now, and I would like to put together a list of resources that, if anybody comes to you and they want additional information, I do have a list of resources and books and websites that can be shared.
Awesome. Thank you so much. The next one is experiences a sudden change in appetite and behavior.
Yeah. So yeah, just going back to the changes in the behavior, you know, abused children can often appear very scared, anxious, withdrawn from family members or friends, depressed, you know, or they can even become aggressive compared to other kids their age.
So, like Vicky mentioned, these are not all the red flags, and also these are red flags that can happen when this might not be going on, but like other types of abuse that is going on. So be curious, as we've been mentioning, be very observant and try to work on yourself a lot where you do have that open line of communication. Because I never had that with my parents. I'm sure, I know Jess, you probably didn't, like we didn't have this healthy explanation of human sexuality and of all of these things. And I feel like the more we arm ourselves with the knowledge, and our children and the youth around us, like if you do work with youth, or if you have nieces and nephews, it doesn't necessarily mean just your kids. The more you're armed with these resources and you arm them, I think, hopefully we can help that statistic go down, because having the conversation is a huge part. Even though it's very awkward and uncomfortable, we can play an active role in. This is just one of those things that we can help with. Yeah. So that's solutions.
Here's the thing too. Yes, having these conversations is extremely uncomfortable. But guess what? If we keep having these conversations over and over and over again, guess who else might feel uncomfortable? Predators. So I want us to have these conversations so that people think twice before hurting a child. And yeah, that's what we need to do. We need to let them know that we are educating our kids. We are teaching them right from wrong. We are letting them know the proper names of their body parts. We are letting them know that if they feel uncomfortable, they should go and tell a trusted adult, the parent, right? Unfortunately, sometimes it can be a parent, right? So knowing how to ask the question, like sexual abuse isn't necessarily when a child isn't necessarily being hurt, right? A child may not even know what's going on until they're much older. So, for example, when I read, doing my research, I read that, you don't want to ask, like, has anyone hurt you or who hurt you? Because hurt means something, right? And they might not really understand or grasp what it is that you are trying to talk to them about. So being a little more like direct and forward, like has anyone ever made you feel uncomfortable? Has anyone ever, made you do something that you didn't want to do? It's empowering the little ones to be able to say no. Yeah.
That's a great point.
Just reframing the way we ask them.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Yeah, exactly.
So we're almost done. I know we mentioned a lot of solutions, but can we talk a little bit about consent? Because I feel like when we briefed and got prepared, I feel like that one was a very big one, and we've mentioned it right now, but yeah, can we talk a little bit about resources, about how to empower ourselves? How can we get educated to, like, how do you talk about these things? How do you talk about consent? There's a lot of resources. So I don't know if Vicky, you want to start us off with I know you mentioned a book last time.
Yeah, there are books out there that are providing information for parents on having these difficult conversations. There is this website that I came across called Child Safety Pledge. And if you go to that website, it's childsafetypledge.org. You will find some information there on how to have that conversation um, with your child, how to have the conversation with other adults in your life, whether it be like family members or teachers, and how to have that conversation with youth serving organizations. Because we assume that our kids are safe at school, but that's not necessarily true. It's our responsibility to make sure that the people who the school is hiring basically, they're getting their background checks, they're getting their fingerprints scanned. You assume that happens, but sometimes that doesn't happen. Things do fall through the cracks. So just kind of like, you never want to be like that person that is asking all those questions, but when you're empowered and you have that information, knowledge is power, right? So empower yourself so that we can teach our little ones how to feel empowered and be empowered to say no as well. Consent, yeah. Yes, you had mentioned something when we were briefing about this, about one thing that we all grew up with was having to go around, the household and saying hello and goodbye to everybody.
Sometimes it was like we would be considered rude if like we were at a family member's house and we didn't hug them hello and even like give them a kiss on the cheek, and then that's what I don't want to show my daughter. Like now I show her, I mean, that's my way of showing her consent is like, well, you choose who you want to give a hug to. And we're not a family who like kisses on the lips. So I never feel like I have anything to worry about that. But I want her to feel comfortable and be like, okay, so most of the time she just says bye everyone and that's it, like I don't make her go hug everyone and like hug everyone, because I didn't like that aspect of like our cultural norm, quote unquote, because I would feel uncomfortable sometimes and I would just still have to do it because then I would be the rude one, as a child.
Mm-hmm.
What does consent mean to you, Cindy? Or how do you talk about it with little ones?
Same thing that we've mentioned before is to tell my daughter that to feel very empowered about her body and that no one gets to touch it. It's a temple. It's something we protect. Because again, and I bring it back to the reproductive part of like, this is where we'll have our babies. And it's so important that as women, we take care of our bodies. And I also say that about men because she's in school with little boys. And I don't want to be like, oh my God, let's not talk about male reproductive systems. And so I say the same, and I try to normalize the conversation, like this is when you're an adult, you're going to learn more about it. Right now, no one gets to touch you unless, and I only say that because one time we went to the doctor and I said, if I'm there and if the doctor asks you, but she still said no, which I thought was great because she was like, no, I think she was already 5, but she knew, I've told her she felt comfortable. She's like, the doctor said, may I touch you? May I, pull down your underwear? I think it was. And she said no. And I was just very proud, because I was kind of embarrassed, but also proud because the doctor's like, okay. And so that was really cool too, that the doctor asked. I think before, I don't know how many times we were asked, right, at the doctors. And so
yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So we put those things into practice and I just try to remind her all the time, like, this is, this is sacred and we always have to protect our bodies and we have to respect other people's bodies as well. And you don't touch other people's bodies. Mm-hmm. So, kind of like both ways so that she knows that that's a big deal. Like it's not something you protect it. So yeah, that's kind of how I've navigated consent, but I'll get more clear the older she gets, like I can't wait.
Yeah. No, I really love to see these changes happening because I know like our parents were probably not comfortable having these conversations with us. I know my mom wasn't, but I am meeting a lot of women, more and more women, just like you guys, who are having these conversations with their little ones, and that makes me happy. I am hopeful that, as you said, these statistics hopefully won't be what they are. I don't know, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. Unfortunate reality is that child sexual abuse will not completely stop in our lifetime. It won't. All we can do is inform ourselves, know what to look out for, and have an open line of communication with the little ones so that they feel safe and comfortable to come to you. And they'll do that by doing what you're doing, having those conversations with them. Just, give kids credit. They understand.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, Vicky, it's not to like resolve it or we have a solution for all of it, this like complex issue, but we are doing this to prevent, right? Like that's the goal ultimately, is to prevent it from happening to someone else.
Yeah.
So well said. Well, good conversation, ladies.
Yeah, this was really good. Please give us feedback. We're going to be throwing out a lot more information as we prepare for this topic, so be on the lookout for that. Vicky, thank you so much for coming onto the Primas podcast. It means a lot. And I'm so happy we met, because this is a start of a wonderful friendship, and I'm very thankful for that. So thank you.
Thank you. No, I'm thankful for you guys too, and thank you for sharing your platform so that we can have these hard discussions.
Awesome. Thank you, Vicky.
I know. I'm happy we finally did this.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Bye. Give us some feedback as always.